Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of The Business of YouTube. Today, the special guest is Nick Meacham from SportsPro. Like most of you probably have met Nick in an event or like on the podcast or like in many different places. He's everywhere. So like in every country, like you just don't know where he is in whatever moment. You just know you're gonna meet him in a SportsPro event. That's for sure. But I'm very happy to have you here, Nick, to the podcast. Welcome to the episode.
Well, thank you for having me. I must say I'm a big fan of all the content you're producing around YouTube at the moment. I'm a big fan, a big follower of it, whether it be in the podcast or in the written format. So it's the honor's all mine to join you.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm a big fan of yours, actually. I think that most of the things I learned from the very beginning were really much from a sports pro event or like reading or like chatting with you. And we had lots of chats, especially about YouTube along the years, which we're probably going to go through in the podcast. But well, I think that's, yeah, definitely like a go-to person with a very, very business mind, but as well like a people person. And I love to have chats with you. So thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Paola. Look, I think and for me as well, it's been a bit of a learning journey the last few years, even when I decided to, within the sports pro business, then set up my own podcast for the Streamtime Sports podcast that I host, was part of a learning exercise to get my head around what was going on, but also everything we were seeing was everyone was trying to work out what was going on in the sports media landscape. And I definitely think even today, I'm constantly learning on how things are evolving and what's working and what's not. So it's a good time to be in our industry, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, everything is moving anyway, so you don't stand still, and you can keep improving and trying out. And one thing I always appreciate is that you try things, and like from the first post pro event I've been in, like to now, everything changed. Like it's not standing still for sure, and you keep trying to push the boundaries and trying new things, which I think is the best thing you can do in the industry. But now let's go and let's start from your story because you tell the stories of everyone like broadcasters, sport industry, athletes, everybody in the industries. But what's your story? Where is Nick Meacham coming from? What's your career and the sports pro story with it?
Sure. Well, I'm Australian originally and studied a degree in Australia around sport, or business degree, but majored in sports and event management. Started working in media and running sports events in Australia before I decided at one random stage in my relatively early start of adulthood that I wanted to do something a bit different, and was considering where to move and sort of focus on my career development and life development, I guess, as well. And the decision came to me basically to try and see what life was like in London. And I moved to London, about 16 years ago now. I had a bunch of friends that also moved from Australia over and were raving about it. When you live in Australia, one of the things is there's a lot of great things about Australia, but it is a long way from pretty much everything. So the accessibility that London life gives, both London in itself, with it having everything that happens within the city, but also the access within a couple of hours to go into dozens and dozens of countries, is such a unique thing for Australians to embrace and to have access to. So that was really exciting for me when I moved, and enjoyed that. And I actually found it really challenging initially to get into the life of the London life and finding work and those types of things, because I was from Australia, I wasn't locally based, but got into media sales, and then got into an opportunity to join SportsPro about 15 years ago, and basically joined and never looked back. Took on more responsibility very quickly within that company and took over running it, about 12 years ago. And with that, it's been a really interesting time to be in a business like ours. I think there's lots of industries that mirror sports, but I think from sports perspective, when I joined the sports media sphere that I am within SportsPro itself, it was very traditional in the topics and things we would discuss. We'd be talking about rights deals, we'd be talking about sponsorship deals, we'd be talking about broadcast rights, maybe hosting of major events and stadiums and what to do there. And that was about it, because sports was basically just handing off all their rights all the time. And really about 13 years ago was the beginning of this new era of, hey, we need to do this stuff ourselves. We need to market ourselves. We need to create content ourselves. We need to create direct relationships with fans. And that didn't exist until really recently, relatively speaking. So since then, it's been hugely exciting and interesting to be in this journey almost with sports, telling the stories, trying to come to grips with what is the best approach in providing value to the fans and what makes sports so special and how to turn that into something that makes it viable as a business. And I think we've been learning, and I've been learning a lot along the way, but I think also sports has been learning a heck of a lot and coming to grips with all the changes that are happening at a global level, at a technology level. And it's still trying to catch up, I think, in many instances, but it's a good time to be doing what we're doing.
Yeah, definitely. And it's evolving at a very fast pace. But what about SportsPro? Because like you've been doing this for 15 years now. I got to know SportsPro, I think 3-4 years ago. Well, probably a bit more, but I like to think it's 3-4. Like the time flies, but when I got to know it, I went to SportsPro Madrid, and that was the place to be, like to learn everything, like to talk to people, to do business, which I really like. Is like you talk business, period. Like you just learn and talk business. People are open. But what has been the journey of SportsPro? Because I know as well that, for example, you were talking about launching a subscription model like forever, and that was way ahead of its time. And like most of us, like if you try new things, most of the time you're ahead of your time and it just doesn't work, or like it's the nature of innovation. So, but how did SportsPro evolve along these years?
Sure. I think there's two things that really factor into our growth journey. And one is, I guess, the consumption trends that exist within the industry. Well, actually, probably three things. One is the consumption of media content, because we're a media business first and foremost. So we produce dozens and dozens of stories every single week around the business of sports, features and insights, video and audio content across all of our channels. And we're doing that through a team that's around 45 people in the business today. But following the journey of this consumption trend, so when I first looking at, say, launching a subscription product, so back 15 years ago, we were just a magazine primarily with a little bit of a digital output. The idea of actually paying a subscription for services to like news websites and the like was actually only at its starting point. And there was a lot of resistance to paying fees for subscription for access to those types of services. So one of the ways that we decided that was going to be a great way to grow and expand the business was looking at the events concept, which is quite a common extension of a media business, particularly on the B2B side. And at the time we did that, there wasn't actually a lot of events in the sports industry that existed around conferences and events. So it was a good time to enter into the market there. And we launched in a few different topics. We've at one stage we're running in 5 different countries with our events in Switzerland, Singapore, Spain, US, and the UK, and we still run in a number of countries globally today. But we've been adding these events. We've been evolving those events, to your point earlier, as the industry's been evolving along the way. Because one of the things that happens when you're running events is, like for example, our OTT event, that's now the media summit for us, is we launched the OTT summit at the time because we looked at all the data of all the content that we were producing, and all the hottest stories were around digital OTT. And basically that was like there was 7 or 8 of the top 10 stories, even surpassing the sponsorship stories, which used to always be at the top of the food chain. And because our audience is the industry, we're not targeting consumers, we are targeting people who work in sports. It was a pretty reliable litmus test to say, hey, the industry needs a bigger focus on this topic as a theme, as they're trying to come to grips with it, and need some specificity. So why don't we launch something that is specific to that topic? And then what's happened over time is we've seen that the focus around OTT has evolved. So first it was about what is it? How do you launch something? Then it's about what business models, and then it's how to make it more about fan engagement, and then going deeper into the delivery aspects of OTT and the ways of delivering success there. And then now we got to this point where, okay, OTT is one small part now of a very, very big pie of different ways of leveraging the different media channels. And so we've evolved with that as well, that the industry's focus has shifted away from OTT and streaming because they worked out, hey, it's actually a lot harder to do than people probably thought. They thought that launching an OTT platform would just kind of write its own checks and have all these fans coming to it. Well, actually, you know what? You've got to work really hard.
Yeah, well, it can work, but it's not a freebie.
Exactly. And I think that was a bit of a surprise because sports had almost been riding this wave for decades of handing over the rights to a broadcast and then magically having millions of people watch its content. And that just didn't transfer in the same way to OTT products like they thought it would. And so what we've obviously been on this journey across the last few years to go, okay, actually, you need content in lots of different places. You need to be across all social with video. You need to be working with distribution partners. You need to have your own platform as well. And then you've got YouTube popping up, not popping up, but basically expanding its importance in society and of course in sports. And as a result, we've been evolving our storytelling, our content, and then our events around that evolution that's been happening at the same time, because we see that is what the industry's focus has been changing along the way. It's gone from we need to launch something to everyone just trying to work out what it was to now we have to look at everything together and try and piece together the right approach, which has to incorporate all these different facets. And that just didn't exist 10 years ago.
Yeah, definitely. Like from 10 years to now, it's like we're talking about a changing time for the way that sports is behaving compared to the audience. Like and the business itself is changing. So the way they are leveraging technology went so fast as well. So something that is existing now wasn't existing 10 years ago, or at least it's like completely different the way it's used. But just getting to that point, when did you see that, speaking of technology and platforms, when did you see that it was already starting being a signal? Because I remember at first, the first few times that there was a SportsPro, like even just in the industry, it wasn't a thing. It was like, it wasn't touching it. The industry was like talking about something else, etc. And there's always a changing point, a turning point where you start getting the signals where something is happening before it happens. And I don't think it happened already technically, but when did you see some signals that something is about to change?
Is that related to the media and focus on digital?
The platforms in general, yeah, in terms of the platforms, because I think that the evolution is like really about platforms starting getting closer to sports and vice versa. I think sports is getting closer to platforms in a way or another. I don't think that we are at the point in which there's a match yet. I would like to deep dive in your opinion there, but like nobody was talking about Amazon, YouTube, Netflix. Like they weren't a thing. Like it's just they existed. Everybody acknowledged that, but nobody was even wondering, like, do we need to do something with it? I remember actually at one dinner at SportsPro in Madrid, I think, where I was chatting with somebody and talking about Drive to Survive, and I remember the surprise. Like it was an interesting topic. Like, is this like a new way to make new audiences? And now, like Drive to Survive is like mature enough to be like, it's like kind of okay, what next? Like let's move on from there. Like everybody wants to Drive to Survive because it's already like standard. So when did you see that coming?
Oh, I mean, it's interesting. To a point of your example, I think what we've seen, or what I've certainly seen over the years, is everyone seems to be working alongside at a different pace. So some are much more thoughtful, way ahead of the curve. Others are way behind. And sometimes they're way behind for reason. Sometimes it's not just ignorance. It's actually because, hey, we've got massive media rights relationships in place. We can't really do much. So we're just going to bide our time and wait for when we have to react versus trying to be progressive. But now you're seeing basically every rights holder, and Premier League was one of the slowest to move, but that's because they were in the best position from media rights. But I'd say that the shift or the interest started really fostering probably around 10 years ago, when I think Netflix was really coming to prominence, was growing at a huge scale. And alongside that, you started to hear from the US in particular, all of these major platforms were starting to look at major cable networks. Okay, we're going to launch our own service, and even if it was just before they were started to launch them, and they went one after the other. It was like within a couple of years, you just heard the next one announced, the next one announced, the next one announced, and you could see the proverbial dollar signs ticking over in a lot of sports. Go, oh, this is exciting. That means more opportunity, more revenue, etc. And then there was so just after that, then there was this whole thought about, well, what about the big tech platforms? Is Facebook going to spend big onto sports? What about Twitter? What about YouTube as well, and Google, and etc. etc. But that didn't really come for way longer than they expected. And in fact, what we've seen over time is, in general terms, most of them have tested sports in some way, in terms of maybe you had a toe dip in terms of taking a traditional approach and buying media rights. But the bulk of them said, actually, you know what, it's not worth us doing that. And we're going to try and be an enabler and an aggregator rather than someone who's going to buy rights. YouTube being obviously one of those examples today. But there's been, I would say, like a number of almost false starts about what this new streaming digital era was going to be. But it wasn't just sports' fault. Broadcasters alike were also having difficulties working out how to approach this new landscape, and it seems to be it's still evolving in front of us. So we've been lucky that we've been right at the thick of it, whether it be through the events we run, through SportsPro's editorial channels, or even the podcasts that I host as well, to be just riding this wave along the way, because it's not like we had the answers. We're trying to work out the answers as we're going along in a lot of instances. But some sports have been more progressive. I think one of the most progressive deals that perhaps was before its time was probably the PGA Tour doing a deal with Discovery to create Golf TV and the sub-licensing rights. That was a real eye-opener when that was announced, because that was around $1 billion deal at the time, and got everyone on notice that, hey, okay, this could be huge. Now, it didn't work out. They ended up shutting down that platform after it was after various moves happened internally. And anyone who's followed Warner Brothers Discovery has known there's been a few turns and changes along their way. But that was one of the big things that grabbed my attention to go, oh, wow, there's some complexity to this arrangement, but it's a really significant commitment. This ability to create a global single sports OTT platform, whilst then going out and doing all these sub-licensing deals and making sure the sport is still available on loads of major networks, was I really loved that approach. And I still think it had a lot of legs in it. But alas, that was probably the main tipping point for me to go, oh, there's something in this, even though it hasn't panned out necessarily the way I would have hoped.
Yeah, and I think on your points that it's about trying to figure it out as we go. I think the right business model, or the right way to approach like new opportunities for sport rights holders, broadcasters, platforms, I think it's to be figured out. But I'd like to understand more, like from your point of view, in terms of timing, because do you think it's the right time now? Is there already some indications of new business models that could work from within the industry, but or it's not the right time yet? And if not, when could be a good time?
Yeah, I think we're in a transition phase, which is quite interesting. I wouldn't say I'm excited yet. I'm wanting to see more. The Kings League is the best example we've heard about, using YouTube, using Twitch, using other platforms to grow audience, connect with a younger generation of fans, and then monetizing through sponsorship and other means rather than focusing on traditional media deals. But they are only still at a small scale in relative to the bigger sports properties. But that model has seemed to be very lucrative. They are expanding and growing their approach, leaning heavily into influencers and creators to bring that to life and give them new distribution channels. And I think there's a lot of what they've done, which sports has to pay a lot of attention to. Women's sports has used that approach. If you think and look at UEFA Women's Champions League, who had a partnership with YouTube and DAZN to make sure their broadcasting of live matches was made available in various places, was a very exciting way to make sure that the reach was extended and expanded. But it did meet some bumps along the way, because DAZN were looking to put their content behind a paywall at the final year of their deal, and couldn't end up doing that because they decided that it wasn't going to be financially viable to do so. And instead, I remember seeing it, I think it was on the way to the office one day, and I saw that this job posted up on LinkedIn that they were hiring for basically a head of like sponsorship sales for women's football. And clearly they made the decision that they were going to try and leverage those rights by selling sponsorship and advertising. So it feels almost like we've taken a bit of a step back in terms of the way we're looking to monetize, in having to do direct commercial sales to advertising and sponsor partners to maximize the value. But you can't use a programmatic approach to maximize the value of live sports. It's still not mature enough, the programmatic ad approach, to get the CPMs and get those revenues up to where they need to be to offset that sponsorship and then more one-to-one approach. And that's the tricky predicament I think we've got, is that chasm between programmatic sales and that one-to-one sponsorship advertising sell, which can clearly drive premiums with the right partner. Without that being resolved, that's always going to be, I think, once sports can find out that way, and YouTube and the like can help solve that, then I think you're going to see a real big momentum shift with people looking to YouTube more and more actively.
Well, definitely programmatic and live sports are not best friends yet. That's no doubt. I think the dollars are not there. They are there for a lot more things, but not for the premium experience. The thing that I see there as well, though, is that sport is way wider than just the live sport. And so I think that the big opportunity is not just on the live, but it's in everything around it, being from the archives, which still I think that they're completely underutilized. I mean, I'm a big believer of the gold mine of archives. People love archives. Even if everybody thinks it's just the live is, I mean, is the diamond, but people watch like games from 20 years ago with the quality is so poor that you can't even realize who is who. But still the emotion of watching the game of whatever the team that you loved, of the sport that you loved, is like there are gems there that are like completely unutilized. But besides the archive, which I'm clearly passionate about, but I think there is a lot of new new content formats for sports to tell the stories around everything that is non-sport, non-live. It's like telling the story of the athletes, telling the story of the people, the emotion around the pitch, even just the sound of the pitch, like literally the sound of the stadium is a content and the format on its own. I think there's more that could be built in general in terms of content and emotions that could be supporting anything else, and then just kind of even out as well in terms of economies, in terms of opportunities for revenue.
I think it's a really important point, and I actually wrote down something I was going to sort of make an emphasis of, is I think in general terms, as an industry, we generalize the term of sports content a little bit too loosely. It's rather about when sports properties and teams, leagues, clubs, athletes, etc., are all looking at what to do, whether it be through YouTube or other platforms, they have to look at the whole mix of what is going out and not just focus on the live game, the non-live game, the archive. There has to be a full set or full approach to creating content on these platforms if you want to really build sustainable and long-term audiences on these platforms. Otherwise, you will be missing a big trick. And it isn't about, like, it's whether it's behind the scenes, whether it's just telling the athlete's story in interviews, whatever it might be. There has to be continue, and there is a lot of organizations, particularly where the rights are clearly defined, as in they don't have access to highlights and they don't have access to archives very closely. Like a lot of the Premier League clubs don't have much access to those types of things. So they've been really good at focusing on the off the field stuff or the practice ground content. And that stuff gets huge engagement when it's got the right players and athletes attached to it, because that's the world we live in today. It's clear that creators and personalities and athletes is what everyone wants to consume. They want to consume content that is including people that they have an affinity with in some way, shape, or form. It doesn't really even matter if they're best in class at their sport. It's something they have an affinity with, that clearly can drive insane numbers of content performance if sports can then leverage that way, that it doesn't have to be This doesn't have to be the live event experience to really get huge audiences and engagement, and that can then be monetized through traditional YouTube means, but also through those partnerships. And there's been some really good examples of that through, particularly in the Premier League, but I'm sure other leagues as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And commercially speaking as well, advertising or even just sponsorship, that you can just, there are different ways to monetize it. And I think that is usually overlooked because it's usually you sell the traditional sponsorship, which is fair enough. It's a very important revenue stream, but it could be way wider than it is. So I think that's it might need to be looked at from a revenue perspective. But now
Well, I
let's
think
talk
there's a couple of
about.
interesting.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, that's right. I'll just add. I think there's a couple of interesting things around the monetization bit. Now, YouTube in the industry generally is getting a lot of praise because of its audience, its impact, and its share of attention, effectively. But it does still get met with some challenge, some criticism about the difficulty of turning that into revenue directly. Now, they have launched a host of products or tools over the years to help that, but they've also come and gone sometimes. I don't think they've been able to absolutely nail that proposition, whether that be one of them launching pay-per-view products many years ago, and that kind of disappeared for a while and then came back. And e-commerce is part of the mix. More control over what ads that you can power and be served on your channels is there. So YouTube is making an effort, but again, even they have found it difficult to like unlock that magic key to make sure that revenue is maximized for every partner and in turn for themselves. So I just think that has been a much trickier challenge for YouTube than I think even many people would have expected as well.
Yeah, I was smiling because when you said the pay-per-view, I remember when I was at YouTube, that product was launched and relaunched like a million times with different names. So I'm like, which version is that? Version 1, 2, 3, which
Yeah,
name?
yeah.
So yeah, it works very nicely for movies, rentals. I think that the first time it was launched, it was called Rentals, or at least internally it was Rentals. I don't remember if it was externally called like that, but then it was again like relaunched many different times with different names. It never kind of worked, and most probably as well for sport is might not be the ideal version, but yeah, I think to your point, like many times a lot of products have been launched and they just didn't stick, not being the right time or not being the right way to market it or not being the right need of the sports right holder as well. Like I think there is a lot of communication that needs to be done in both ways, most probably. But like let's go through like the elephant in the room, or at least the key point of YouTube. What's your view on YouTube in the mix of platforms in the whole ecosystem? Like nobody was talking about YouTube for forever, and then suddenly it became like a topic. I remember like at conferences or even like in podcasts. I see in your podcast it's you started interviewing people from YouTube. We met at YouTube events, and like it became a thing. It's becoming a thing. I don't believe it is a thing yet. Uh, but where do you see YouTube in the mix?
Well, the tricky bit that sports still has, its measure of success has still been basically built on revenue more than audiences, and translating a bigger audience number on YouTube and other social platforms into revenue directly has not been linear for sports. And that's what's, I think, created this constant challenge about trying to work out the optimal approach for sports to use YouTube. You've done a great job through your channels of highlighting some of the real success stories of those that have really led into it, and they are generating revenue from it. But I think you have to be looking at, you can't look at it in isolation. It has to be, okay, this is giving us X audience, add that to our wider commercial strategy and how we can bring that to life, and whether it's through sponsorships that aren't just built solely for that platform but more wider. Otherwise it can be really tricky to look at each platform in isolation, particularly if you're starting out to determine, hey, we're going to drive revenue out of it, because it's not linear, because just more content, more good content doesn't equally mean more revenue proportion to the investment. It becomes a really tricky balance of test and iterate and learn as you go along, but then to make commitments to do more and more to try and get better ahead of the curve is a difficult sell internally if you can't show, if we spend X, we're going to produce Y. So I think that that ultimately is the tricky bit. But I think there's few can argue with all the data you see these days. YouTube has an unbelievably important role in society in consumption of media and content, and so you have to be part of that. And the fact that clubs and teams and athletes alike all can have a voice and all can have a platform on YouTube, which is basically, depending on which country you're in, the most important platform now of consumption there that exists, subject to how where you're based. They have to be there. You have to be doing good things. You can't just be dumping content on the platform. You have to be prioritizing it as one of your core channels. And yeah, again, a lot of the major leagues and competitions all have very dedicated content resource to be producing and managing those platforms. And the tricky bit is just to know how much is enough. And that's the million-dollar question, I think, for a lot of people, is how much is enough investment of time, strategy, and execution on those platforms to maximize the value of what you can potentially give to them. And I don't have the answer there, unfortunately.
And who do you think is doing a very good job on YouTube?
Well, I think one of the ones I would point to who's doing a good job is more on their macro approach of YouTube than just like what's on their channel alone. So I think, and you've done some good examples of highlighting platforms like F1 and UFC and WWE, who have really good and established audience bases, highly engaged, highly subscribed to. But I look more at the bigger picture of who's taken the right macro approach. And what I mean by the macro approach is basically who's allowing the use of their content most effectively outside of their own channels as well. So that could be, if you're at a league level, what you're allowing teams and clubs to do, what you're allowing athletes to do, and what you're allowing creators to do. And really, it was only a few years ago that the NFL and the Premier League were so tight on what could be produced and allowed on those platforms. And now they've come to the realization that approach doesn't work. And the YouTube Sunday Ticket deal was one of the examples. That was one of the most exciting parts of that deal to me, was they're going to work with creators to have alternative broadcasts and make it available through those channels. And so the more that they're leaning into that creative approach is the ones I'm most impressed and excited about. The NBA has been doing that for a lot longer and being much more relaxed with allowing their content to be used by creators. The NFL doing it as well. The one I think about then taking that macro approach is actually comparing and contrasting what PGA Tour has done versus what Live Golf have done. So obviously, they've been competitors with each other since Live Golf came to the scene. But one of the things that really has let them grow an audience and grow a slightly different audience at the perhaps PGA Tour and get support behind them is democratizing the ability for athletes to create their own content, with Bryson DeChambeau being the main example of that, who's got now a couple of million subscribers on the platform. He's now
doing super well on the platform. Yeah, that's true. It's like crazy good.
Just came to the market and instantly blew everyone away with what they were doing. And now it's changed his perception. He's now got millions of subscribers. But that would not have been achievable if he was at the PGA Tour, not just because of the calendar, but because of the restrictions on rights that were there as well. So the fact that Live Golf have allowed that flexibility for someone to do that and to create more content in and around the events themselves has, I think, given them a huge advantage of basically taking off some of the edge of the criticisms they had when they came to market and got a lot of fans behind them. And now, as a result, they've now got the biggest star in golf, basically, because of just allowing you to create content on his YouTube channel.
Yeah, so the rights holder is becoming like more as an enabler as well. So it's like creating more opportunities for everyone, not just the gatekeeper, but it's like really like pushing the boundaries there. Like, yeah, I think with platforms like being like very important in terms of distribution, then it's a smart move.
Absolutely. The other example that I'm interested to see how it plays out is, well, Formula One is a great example of who those who've seen huge growth driven by a whole host of reasons, whether it be the Drive to Survive, whether it be the approach the Formula One itself has taken, or it's allowed its teams to take, and obviously the athletes themselves. But MotoGP is actually a competition that has a lot more restrictions on it than, say, Formula One. Yet Formula One's ownership have now bought MotoGP, and they are US based through Liberty Media. I can only imagine that they will say they'll try and transfer some of those learnings to a MotoGP.
Yeah, most probably.
now where we're at, because of the maturity of where we're at in terms of the adoption of streaming and so forth, it will be super interesting to see how quickly that can lead to growth of MotoGP as a property, like it has with Formula One. So interested to see how they're just a bit later to the party in that instance, but how impactful that is even today. So that's one I'm very interested to follow.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how fast that's going to be, because once you have the learning and you've been the innovator, then it's like uh, you just really repeat and scale, because the learnings are there and the data are there already. Which when you're the innovator, is not that easy. You might be wrong most times and just be right at the right time, and that's what matters. But still, you can be wrong a lot of times. So that's
I remember a good example that we've covered before a while ago was the comparison between Manchester City as a football club and Manchester United when I was on the Stringtime Sports podcast, where basically I interviewed the then CEO of media for them at the time, and the thing that they had to be they had to be late movers, because they had this challenge and tension with fans that anything they did would undergo huge scrutiny and be ripped apart basically if they didn't do it well. Whereas a Man City, because they were in a different journey, because they were constantly innovating and trying different things, they were allowed to fail in public and allowed to try things, be one of the first movers, and it was okay for them. They could just move on to the next thing. But Man United didn't have that flexibility to take that approach. They had to be so careful on how they approach things, because there's so much backlash if they got it wrong. So I just think shows the emphasis of the importance of or the challenge, I guess, some sports have. If you have a challenging dynamic with fans and audiences, that you have to be very careful on how you approach things. But if you can get going with relatively minimal pushback, then you can just be constantly innovating on the fly and don't have to be too afraid of stuffing it up every now and again. People will get over it quickly.
Yeah, because if it does hold you back, then it's a problem because you can't do anything, and then you get stuck. You're basically like, your own success is going to be your biggest problem, like to move ahead, which you don't want to.
Exactly, and that's as soon as exactly, and that's why it's a tricky balance for some sports properties. But I do think fundamentally now, with the amount of content out there, that clubs and teams and competitions can just be a bit more relaxed than they used to be, because there's so much out there that they do stuff up something, it's not the end of the world. Unless they really stuff up something, they can just get on with it, keep trying new things, and they'll be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, a couple of more questions, and then I'll let you go. But I think we can go over like for forever with this episode. So, what do you think that the industry doesn't get right on YouTube? Like, what do you think that they don't get of YouTube as an opportunity, or like as a platform, like in general?
I think there's different tiers of people, and they're on different journeys, right? I just think that with YouTube, there is this big question mark still about the monetization part that they still really struggle to come to grips with. And I think because it does take, it's not just turning on a switch. Like, even if you are generating good audiences, you then have to back that up with that commercial strategy and the messaging and the right approach to be able to maximize the value of really great content and audiences that you're sustaining on those channels. And that makes it tricky when you've got a balance, particularly in sports, where you've got a lot of key commercial people that are from the legacy of traditional sponsorships. They're being tasked with maximizing the value of these audiences. I just think it creates a bit of a predicament in some sports properties that aren't able to transfer and really sync up their commercial teams and their media teams all on the same page to maximize that value. And I also just think, you're someone who's really across this, Paola, but the importance of even things like, it's almost basically treating it like almost like a traditional news outlet in terms of getting SEO right, getting thumbnails right, getting all those small little things right. You have to keep testing and find the right ways of approaching the way you're publishing content on these platforms. Otherwise, a great piece of content might be completely missed if you don't just signpost it the right way. So I think there's a practical, technical challenge that when sports is kind of building itself up from the ground up. And what I mean by that is, even in the OTT days of when it just first came to town, I would see social media execs being tasked, can you create a strategy for a major sports property to launch an OTT service? Then I just publish content on social. What do you want me to come up with a strategy now? That sort of like mindset of just sports will just work it out, rather than always bringing in specialists and experts to do it from other industries. Perhaps that need to learn as we go has been an ongoing challenge, or I would say I want to say doing it on the cheap, but taking the soft approach of getting up and running rather than investing into it, getting great talent and great experts to really come up with the right strategy and approach. I think if people sports is taking it for itself for granted, or taking the opportunity for granted a little bit, that you can't just magically deliver success on YouTube.
Yeah, I guess definitely it does change the skill sets that you need in the organization. So from content to like SEO, and on that definitely we can help. But I don't want to be too commercial. But definitely it does require like a different approach, or knowledge, like basic knowledge of how to make it work at best. But now let's turn around. What is YouTube now getting of the industry, of the sport industry?
Look, I think they've been working really hard at it. I think they do have a good feel of the industry as a whole, and how difficult it is to unleash or unlock the opportunity and get sports really to go all in on YouTube, because sports is still coming from that legacy licensed rights sales approach as its core way of being funded. Whereas YouTube saying, "Hey, we're not doing that. But what we're doing is we're going to give you the tools and the audience to make it work for yourself." That sounds like a lot of hard work when you just get given a check by someone for all your for your on-field performance, by and large, right? So that has been a challenge that YouTube has tried to overcome. They haven't been able to overcome it. They've realized that they can't, and they shouldn't, open up that floodgate of buying media rights, doing media rights deals left, right, and center. Or they have done a few, which has then got everyone in the industry very excited that they're going to start buying all these rights, and that clearly is not going to be the approach. But I think every major tech platform has found it more difficult than I think they expected for sports to really come and embrace and work with them properly. They've all been a bit hesitant to get on board. I think YouTube and every other tech platform has struggled with that tension and dynamic in the relationship, just because sports has been so historically built on this "you pay me a check and then I'll work with you" approach, which just does not work. And that is difficult to overcome, I think, for YouTube. And they have been trying to find ways of more enabling, but because it's such hard work to still monetize it, it makes it that there's a little bit of a hurdle still to overcome for YouTube to get really the adoption in and arms around them that I think they probably expect or hope. But I think it'll come.
And when do you think that there's going to be a good match between the industry and like, if you had the crystal ball, like, because eventually it's not now, clearly, but it's kind of, they're getting closer and closer, but not there yet. How long is going to take for you, from your point of view, to get together and build something meaningful for both, clearly?
What I'm concerned or fearful for sports is, I don't know if that's the right way to put it, is I'm concerned there's another further challenge or two ahead. And the big challenge is that athletes and creators now are finding that there's a huge appetite for first person style content, and every athlete can build an audience quickly if they want to invest the time and effort into it, if they've got the profile and the platform. So I think sports is going to have another bump in the road where they're going to have to democratize access even further, giving athletes and creators even more support and more access to live content, and use their channels for the access. And that direct revenue stream just will not come to the fore through their own channels. They're going to have to basically trust that they can turn that into value in other ways at some stage, and that these athletes who have huge audiences do the work for them, which then creates all sorts of challenges around the commercial relationship and the types of deals that exist for an athlete to play in a sport or a team. So I feel like there's an extra predicament or extra challenge that's to come of solving that challenge of these athletes having incredible audiences, engagement, and so forth. That they're going to need access. The smart way to build audiences will give them more access to more of this live content and non-live content, and that's going to drive much higher growth in audience visibility. But then the economics will have to change again, and that's going to be tricky to get that balance right. Athletes are going to want more of the pie because they'll be growing the audience quicker, and sports will be the enabler of that. But I just feel there's going to be some tension in there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you definitely have a strong point. Athletes are going to grow more and more on the creative space, let's put it this way. And they're definitely underutilized by far. Like they're the most underutilized. At least I'm talking about YouTube, where like literally before Cristiano Ronaldo was on the platform, it wasn't a thing. And I remember talking with a lot of clubs about that and saying, why don't you get the content and you create channels for you create the channels for the athletes? Okay, you give the content and they can decide whatever they put in it, or like you manage it, and it becomes like your own media space with your own team. And I remember lots of eyebrows, but like it wasn't a thing. It was, and I understand that from a legal point of view it's fairly complex, and from a commercial point of view is very complex. But still, to your point, that's your army. Like it's where like the new audiences are coming for. Like they're coming for the athletes. They follow the athletes. Like you see the kids, they're like they love Barcelona, but they love as well Chelsea, and they love you name it, whatever other team. And you're like, but why do you love this, and that? I mean, and maybe they are like from Norway, like it nothing to do with Norway. And they're like, yeah, because this player was here, and there, so I just got to know it and I love it. And so it's just that a different approach to fandom, and therefore like they actually open up to new audiences and new commercial opportunities. But from a right holder / club perspective, it's not there yet. But you need tools to actually make it happen, and you need commercially to think it through, because then it could become very big, but it needs to really be thought through. But there's a very big opportunity. But if not managed right, or not managed at all, I think that athletes are gonna become a big thing on social media, no matter what, and YouTube as well. And that's gonna be a missed opportunity for the rights holders. I think if they are not proactive on that, they're just gonna be missing out. It's not that it's not gonna happen; they are gonna be missing out.
Absolutely. And I think the WSL, the Women's Super League in the UK, has part of their rights deal. There is an element of it where they are giving athletes some access to content. So I think highlights available for use on their own platforms more freely and more regularly. I believe it's highlights, which I think you're just going to see more of that come into play, because they'll be able to track that data of consumption as well, and get a much bigger piece of the pie of audience that they can start sharing with commercial partners. But if they want to actually take control of those deals, actually, hey, we want to sell basic distribution through your channels, which could be a thing. I remember going back about 14, 13 years ago, there was a groundbreaking deal that happened in football where Wayne Rooney for Manchester United re-signed his deal with them. And one of the parts of that was he basically sold his marketing rights to the club, much more than has ever happened before. So basically the club would sell and maximize the value out of him how they saw fit, but he would get paid a much bigger fee as a result of that to a traditional player salary. Now, I don't know how that's manifested and changed over the years now, whether that's part and parcel, but I feel like that type of, say, key moment where the clubs need to make a decision is, do they want to actually pay a premium to athletes to actually have their channels at their own fingertips? And do athletes want to allow that to be the case as a new enabler of much bigger audiences, and not just being name, image, and likeness, but actually the channels that they have themselves? Will be a really exciting curveball, but very complex legally. And I think you will never see a uniform deal agreed. I think in that instance, I can't see athletes across the board agreeing to that, but you might have some that will be up for it because they don't want to bother on trying to do commercial deals. They're happy that someone else does it for them if they can benefit for it. So yeah, not sure that'll play out, but I would like that to come to the fore, because it just feels like it's a missed opportunity if they don't focus on the athletes themselves somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I had the last question was the $1 billion question, if YouTube is going to buy rights, but you already answered the question, so I think that's well, if you know a bit the industry, you know that most probably it's not going to be the case unless it's a case by case, and there's a real reason for it. I saw a lot of rights holders being very excited about that. I don't
Oh
think,
yeah, they're very excited. They're very
yeah, I don't
excited.
think.
But
I don't think
sorry,
it's the
John.
DNA. I don't think it's the DNA. It's not. It's a platform, and the platform is really about making growth and giving tools and selling advertising. That's for sure. Like it could be done better, no doubt. But it's not about buying rights. It's not. It's not the sky of Marduk at the beginning of the keyboard of the satellite era, and that's not the play.
Yeah. No, I don't think it is the play, and I don't think it would make financially much sense, because where do you draw the line? Where do you say, yes, I'm going to pay rights fees to you, but I'm not going to pay it to this other company? They could be using advanced formulas to work that out, basically, that they could be sharing as an optionality. But instead, I think they've done a couple of strategic decisions around the Sunday ticket, and indeed the matches playing in the NFL agreement they've done for the Brazilian match they're playing from a global deal perspective. I think that's a test case. It's a learning exercise. Can they basically prove out, and therefore then be able to show other sports properties, hey, we did this ourselves. We got this sort of audience by broadcasting this. We drove this sort of revenue from it. Here's the business case. Here's the thesis here. The NFL was never going to agree to do that for free. But I do think it's one of these things they're going to be able to use this as a case study to then sell to others and say, we're not going to pay you for the rights, but we believe that our thesis is that if you broadcast globally on these platforms, you can drive proportional revenue to your platforms. And if that works well, then you should really be thinking about working with YouTube as your destination or platform of choice globally, rather than going and doing it yourself through your own channels or distributing them through dozens and dozens and dozens of different partners. And obviously, if it works brilliantly, then maybe they might go and spend more money on a few bits here and there. But I can't imagine at the scale of a YouTube that moves the needle enough, unless they either have to go all in, or they just show the case, and then they step back and go, look, we've done it, we've shown it to you now. Now go and do it yourselves. I think that's more likely to play out than starting to go on a spending spree, personally.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that, and I'm very curious to see what's gonna be with the broadcasters. I think that the big winners are gonna be the broadcasters, the free-to-air broadcasters. So we're going backwards in theory. So we're going like satellite and then free-to-air, which is a bit funny. But if you look at what ITV and Channel 4 are doing for like across the board, I'm not talking about sports, I'm talking about like entertainment content, but still, like they are monetizing very, very nicely in all the platforms, on their OTT, on TV, and they're selling very well as well, YouTube. And what they're doing is actually like content that is live or nearly real time, like they put it on YouTube too, and they're selling it at a premium. Because they're good at selling at a premium, and they're selling their audiences at a premium, and rightly so, and they know how to sell it. The point is as well, like you need to have the right type of skills to sell that kind of product, because it's not just selling sponsorship, it's just a different animal on its own. And I'm actually curious to see if then sports will come back in that direction, so being more into YouTube, but with the broadcaster involved. So it's going to be like the rights holders, the broadcasters, the platform, and the one that is selling it is the broadcaster who knows how to sell it properly. So I'm actually curious to see if that's going to be one of the options of the play out in the future. What do you think?
With the example you gave of Channel 4 and Channel 4's example, is it just shows that having a single destination for the content doesn't work, doesn't matter. Having it in many places doesn't cannibalize your audience or cannibalize the opportunity of driving more revenue. So if you have your content available on linear channels and then you also make it available on YouTube, it won't it won't eat away at audiences anyway. You don't have to worry about that. It's just amplifying and scaling up your audience and commercial opportunity. So I think now that that's becoming more and more of an example of a case study, I do expect you to see more and more of that. The question will be is whether the broadcasters that you've talked about as an example will want it on their platform, or whether the sports properties will say, well, we'll keep it for us and do it through our own channels, and you just have you just keep it through your own linear networks. But either or, it should be made available on YouTube more and more as we go along. So I think that's inevitable that you will see it being a focus being not non-exclusive in multiple places, and YouTube is almost always one of those.
Yeah. It sounds about right. To be fair, let's see what the future will hold, and maybe in a year time we're gonna see where we are, and if everything moves very fast all of a sudden, or like it's still kind of where we are today. But thank you very much, Nick. It was a very interesting chat, as I suspected, and I thank you for all the work you're doing to move the industry forward, and keep doing the great job that you're doing.
Oh, and same to you, Paolo. You're doing some great stuff as well. So everyone who's finding this out on various channels, make sure you do follow Paolo's work. It's some of the best in the business.
Oh, thank you so much. Follow Nick Meacham. You all know Nick Meacham. It doesn't need a presentation or introduction from me, but and that's about the podcast. Is the podcast on YouTube, by the way? I was wondering.
It is. So we are, but we need to
That's
ramp
the
up our video
billion-dollar
output.
question.
Yes, yeah. You'll see more of that coming soon. We've got a channel there as well. On Streamtime Sports, you can find on YouTube if you want to check out some of the stuff on there. But more to come on that side, that's for sure.
Okay, I'm gonna put all of the links in the description and in LinkedIn as well. So just go follow the podcast and Nick Meacham. All right, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, and see you to the next episode. Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Paolo. Thanks, everyone.